Agenda is three study sessions, the first of which is 6701 Shellmound Street Residential Development.
Good evening, Chair Cardoza and the Commission. This is our first study session today. It's on 6701 Shellmound Street. It's also known locally or in the planning department as the Nady site. So this site is on the north side of our town, at the border of Berkeley, and it's on the west. It's west of the railroad tracks. So the visual image is right here. So there are existing two buildings that are owned by Mr. Nady, and these will be demolished to accommodate the plan developed by AvalonBay, the applicant here. So this is the site plan to get you oriented. Shellmound is on the bottom. I'm sorry, the Shellmound Street is on the side right here. And then you have the freeway. This is towards the west. So it is a 260-unit project on a little over a 2-acre site, and it on the ground floor you have it's basically a residential structure over a podium. On the ground floor, facing Shellmound Street, is not parking garage, but it's fronted by the residential lobby right here, and there are some commercial space as well as places for a fitness room, and I will talk a little bit more about those uses a little later. In terms of how you access the site, so here's the entry to the garage. We have a couple of loading zones that are required by regulations, and then you have green areas along the perimeter. There's a dog run right here, a small 1,200 square feet of green park area that they're calling it, and then as I'll show you in the floor plans, there's also a roof garden on the roof. So here's the circulation plan. As you can see, the yellow is the vehicular access, and the podium access is two ways, right here and here. This is the second floor plan. Again, as you can see, all the units are along Shellmound Street, so that you don't see a parking garage along the street frontage. The numbers that you see indicate the number of bedrooms. This is the third floor plan. As you can see, it is on the podium. It's a double-loaded kind of a development. And again, the numbers indicate the number of bedrooms. And floor plans between 4th to 7th floors are pretty much similar. And you can see how the 1 units and the 2-bedroom units are sited along the podium. As you can see, all the 3-bedroom units do face the podium. This is the last floor, and this is to indicate the roof gardens that's here indicated in green. In terms of the unit mix summary, we have a smaller, relatively compared to some different projects in town, smaller number of studios. The bulk of the project is 1 and 2 bedrooms. As you can see, 42% are 1 bedrooms and 44% are 2 bedrooms, and you have 12 3-bedroom units. The sizes of the units, each type of units, are slightly larger than what we have typically seen in the past, and you can kind of see what the different unit square footages are. This is the sections. The first one goes east to west, and I didn't mention there are 2 levels of parking, and there might be a partial basement level of parking as well. Okay, starting to think. All right. These are the elevations. The applicant has kind of worked more on the elevations, so I'm going to leave it to him to describe a little bit more in detail what the different materials are, since this is sort of a work in progress. And this is the rendering of the Shellmound Street frontage. And again, the applicant will go into more details in terms of different materials and what their design intent here is. In terms of conformity to land use policies, this does lie in the MUR, or the mixed use with residential zoning district, and the proposed uses of multi-unit residential is allowed by right. And they are also proposing about 3,000 square foot of commercial space on the ground floor fronting Shellmound Street. The parcel size is between 1 and 5 acres, about 2.2 acres, and our regulations say that if a parcel size is between 1 and 5 acres, we need a mix of uses. And if a mix of uses is not possible, then a single use is permitted, Single use is provided if the Planning Commission is convinced can make the finding that a mix of uses on this site is not feasible. And to this extent, if I can get this to work back. Excuse me. Yeah, there you go. Right, so going back to the mix of uses, this is a question that will be asked of the commission. They are proposing 3,000 square foot of commercial space on the ground floor. They're also proposing some sort of amenity about the same area, about 5,000 square feet. So they do have areas designated which are non-residential in nature. However, given the location of the site, they are apprehensive in terms of whether they can really get any kind of retail or commercial spaces that can be loaned out. So to that extent, there is a possibility that you can consider what they're proposing as a single use with a small commercial space, and then make the finding that, if you can make the finding that a mix of uses is not feasible at this location. In terms of FAR, what is allowed is 4.0 by right, and which can be increased to 6 with a bonus. And what they are proposing is 3.5, which is allowed by right. What they do need bonus points is for residential density, and the residential density is. I need to get this fixed. Pardon me for this. I'm not sure what the problem is here. I think it's frozen. All right. Okay. So I think our slide is missing. In terms of residential density, I believe it is a little bit more than what is allowed by right. I don't have the numbers in my head, but what it calculates to is that it does require 43 bonus points for the residential density, but their FAR, as well as their height, is within what is allowed by right. In terms of parking...
Excuse me, Miru?
Yes.
I have the numbers here.
Okay.
100 units per acre is allowed by right. 135 is the maximum with a bonus. They're proposing 115 units to the acre.
Right.
So that requires 43 bonus points.
Bonus points. Going back to parking, in terms of the total parking that calculates for this project, mainly for residential, and then we also account for the commercial space, is 391. What they're proposing is 338. So they are proposing parking which is below what is the required minimum by regulations. This is permitted with a conditional use permit, and the findings that you need to make in order to allow this parking is whether if the TDM measures are put in place to reduce the parking demand, and whether the reduction of parking spaces will not result in parking impacts on the adjacent uses. To this extent, the applicant is in the process of preparing parking surveys for projects similar to this size and in the surrounding neighborhood, and that would give us an idea of what the actual parking demand is, and which would help you to be able to make this finding that the reduction of parking spaces is not going to create impacts. Bike parking, they do provide a little bit more than what is required by our regulations. It's for residential, it is 16 short-term and 260 long-term, and for commercial, it's 2 and 2. What they're proposing is 365 spaces within a secured garage and more than 17 spaces for short-term spaces. And if I can go back to the site plan, I forgot to show you that the bike parking within the garage is located in this hatched area. So all this is bike parking. And in terms of secured garage, this is the division of the parking garage. This would be an area where visitors and tenant and visitors to the residence, as well as potential visitors to the tenant spaces, they would be parking here, and the parking for bike is also provided at this point here.
Can I ask a question about the parking real quick?
Mm-hmm.
So the is there a requirement for guest parking?
For bike?
No, just for car guest parking.
Yes.
So that's separate from the parking required for the residential units.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. So 65 are guest parking that are required, and 323 is what is required by. So that is, the other thing is the open space. We now have requirements, as you know, for private open spaces as well as common open spaces. And for this project of this size, what this calculates to is about 10,400 square feet of private open space, which means essentially in terms of balconies or patios for within each unit. And the common space that is required is a little over 5,000 square feet. What they are proposing comes to 17,200 square feet of common open space. And that is counted by counting the podium area, the area of the roof garden, as well as the dog run along the perimeter, as well as the park fronting, a small park fronting Shellmound Street. They have not yet figured out in terms of private open space, how many units are going to have a balcony, so this is something that will need to be worked out as they move forward with their application. In terms of the staff comments that were made on this project, I think that staff is also feeling a certain amount of fatigue in terms of having these podium-style multicolored stucco buildings, and that was also basically the main feedback that most staff members had, that there was nothing different or exciting or of architectural interest in this project as such. There was a comment made regarding what would be the appropriate non-commercial uses at this location, and some of the suggestions that were thrown out was community non-profit centers, perhaps outdoor recreational type uses, which would link with the park north of the site in Berkeley, perhaps some kind of incubator office space for the surrounding technical schools, such as the Expression College, which is adjacent to the site. Staff also felt that the siting of open spaces seemed as an afterthought, especially on the ground floor, and more work needed to be done in terms of how these open spaces would be used, both at the podium level, for which we don't have a landscape plan at this point, as well as along the perimeter. Another idea that was thrown out there in terms, and this came from the fire department, since the project is still working out some of the fire access issues. So one idea that was thrown is that fire access could potentially be considered via a 20-foot lane that would connect the Shellmound Street and go along the western property line. So it would go along the western property line facing the freeway. And this could also function as a bike and pedestrian path, since the fire now allows the fire lane to be constructed of what is called grasscrete, so it doesn't look like like a regular asphalt fire lane, but it would look like a grassy path which they could use, and which could eventually connect to go across, connect to 65th Street along in future. And what this would do, it would take away a portion of the bike and ped trail away from Shellmound Street, which is sort of a busy stretch of Shellmound Street. So what it would happen is, starting from Shellmound Street along the western perimeter, you have a 20-foot fire lane, and that in the future can be connected along the Expression Colleges and then the Federal Building, which fronts 65th Street. So that was an idea that was thrown out there. We have not explored this, and it's something that we could consider in the future.
So that would be going down between the buildings and the freeway?
Yes, so let me see if I can show that to you. So if you see this, so what would happen is, let's see, this is Shellmound Street. So the fire lane would go along the perimeter right here, and in the future, this could be extended. You can't quite see, but it could be extended down here and connect to 64th Street, 65th Street. So that's the idea. So what it would do, it would solve their fire lane issues, since because it goes from Shellmound to Shellmound along the perimeter. It will not need a roundabout. It will circle the property and would kind of save space in terms of how the fire lane is accessed. And at the same time, if in the future, if there's an opportunity, it can be extended and used as a bike and ped lane down to 65th Street. So what it would do, it would take away bikes and peds from this side of Shellmound. And then eventually they will need to come back to Shellmound, but it was an idea that was floated.
So Maru, you're saying to circle the property, so it would come up from the freeway east to Shellmound between the new building and Expressions?
Yes.
Okay, there's space there for that. And there's
Right,
no road
so
there.
in theory, if we cannot make the connection right down to 65th story, you can still come along the new building, go into the Expression, because they have a parking garage.
Okay.
It's a little convoluted, as it would be.
So you're not
right
actually
now.
circling the building, but you're going beyond the building and through
yes, in the
Expressions parking lot?
Right,
Okay.
right. But not for them in the future. That would be a possibility. So we're not saying that they need to make that connection. Yeah. So the applicant also held a community meeting on the 21st. About 5 to 7 residents were present, including Council Mayor Davis, as well as Commissioners Gunkel and Keller were present. It was acknowledged that the location was not suitable for retail uses and recreation-related uses, and uses related to Expression College was seen as some possibilities. It was also suggested that the site was being underutilized and that it could accommodate a taller building and take advantage of potential views. There was also a discussion on design and the need to move away from multicolored stucco buildings. In terms of issues to be considered, what I mentioned earlier, it's the mix of uses. The regulations, as I mentioned, require a mix of uses since the site is about over 2 acres. However, the regulations do not outline the proportion of the mix. So the current proportion is 260 units and 3,000 square feet of commercial space. So the staff is requesting to the commission to give us comment on whether you are okay with the proposed mix of use groups, or whether you can make the finding that the mix of uses at this site is not feasible and that a single use, and that would be the residential use, is okay. So we need some direction in that, in terms of the mix of uses. Unit mix, this is a standard question that we ask the commission on every residential project, whether you like the mix of the studios, 1 bedroom, 2 bedroom, and the 3 bedrooms. As I'd mentioned, they do provide parking, which is less than what our regulations outline, and so we need direction whether the commission is okay with the proposed parking and whether the findings which I had mentioned regarding TDM and the fact that there are measures or evidence to show that it will not create a parking impact to adjacent users, whether those findings can be made or not. As I'd mentioned, they do need 43 bonus points, so we seek a direction in terms of what preferences for the bonus categories you have on this site. Also, any direction on the open space, the proposed common open spaces in terms of its location and purpose would be appreciated. Staff has hired Urban Planning Partners, it's an environmental firm, to conduct the environmental review for this project. In terms of permits, the project needs a conditional use permit for the density, parking, and also potentially for the mix of uses, and design review for new construction. So in terms of recommendation, we are seeking direction in these 5 to 6 areas that I just mentioned. So that concludes my presentation. The applicant does have a presentation as well. So I'm here for questions now and, of course, later.
Does anybody have any questions from the room?
I guess I have a question or sort of a request. I think that later, in order to give you feedback on possible amenities in order to grant bonuses, that I would like to somehow see the list of
Okay.
potential things again, because
The
since we
potential
don't have it.
categories?
Yeah,
Okay.
so if you could somehow put that up there or get us a copy of it or something.
Yeah, I can. That can be done. I can make an overhead copy for that. All right. So,
I was actually just wondering, usually for study session packages, I mean, should we be getting actual floor plans of the building as well as, color elevations of all the elevations of the building?
our standard policy has been that we allow the applicant to give as detailed plans or as they want. And we tell them that the more details you give at the study session, the more feedback you will get from the commission. So we leave it to them really with the encouragement to give as much details as possible. So something of this nature, it is preliminary. I mean, there are a number of things which are missing, as you indicated, other than the flow plans, which have not been worked out, but also things like stormwaters and detailed landscape plan. But a lot of times, the applicant is interested in getting some kind of feedback from the commission in the general direction of the project, the mix of uses, the general massing, the number of unit counts, the size of the units. So they want some feedback and direction on those broad parameters, and then they go away and come back. And depending on the project and depending on how when they do make an application, if the staff feels that there have been substantial changes, we have often come back with a second study session. So there's no hard and fast rule that you have one study session and then the next one is going to be for approval. It really depends from project to project.
Thanks.
Yeah, I just would echo that sentiment that I did find I totally appreciate that it's the applicant's, right and ability to put anything they want before us, but I did, and there are times where we want to see things very preliminarily, but I did find the plans not the meatiest, so I think it will be a little bit more challenging to give robust comments.
I mean, like I said, if the commission can give us direction on that, if you want to see a certain level of plans at the study sessions, then you're welcome to tell us that, and we'll relay that to the applicants. I mean, this is kind of like a policy for the commission. Because you have seen, those of you who have been here for a while, you've seen a variety in terms of the kind of plans that you see at the study session. So something for you to think about and give us direction.
As a minimum requirement, what we expect to see at a minimum.
For a study session, and, there is requirements for the application, when it comes for an approval. So we are pretty clear on that, but
Or
for the
just
study
an
session.
understanding that a second study session might be required if a set of plans is preliminary enough.
That's what I would
Yeah.
say, yes. Because I understand that you don't want to go down a pathway that isn't
Right.
possible.
Right.
And at the same time, if there aren't enough details, we would need another study session. So I'm not sure where that would fall out.
Right, right. And, and that's something that, staff kind of makes a judgment call as well, whether, depending on how they're responding, how they have responded to commission's first comments, that's one thing. The other possibility is always the case that if there is only one study session, and then when it comes for a decision and you feel that certain details are not there, you can continue the item. There is no, I'm not putting a gun on your head when I come here asking for a decision. It can.
That was sort of my point. It was just
Right.
that it doesn't really matter to me, but I just want the applicant to understand their risks.
Right, right. Okay. So are we ready for the applicant's presentation?
Yes. Would the applicant please come forward?
Hi, Jeff White with AvalonBay. I just want to make a quick introduction as to who AvalonBay is, and then I'll turn it over to our architect, who will walk you through more of the details and maybe a little more enhanced presentation than what you have
The
in your
microphone up
package.
to your mouth.
Oh,
There you go.
okay. All right. So just a quick comment on AvalonBay. We are a public company, and we build exclusively multifamily apartments in the Northeast, Mid-Atlantic, and the West Coast. That portfolio currently is about 275 communities and 82,000 apartments. So from that experience, we are very scientific about how we go about things, including floor plans. So you'll have plenty of opportunity to look at the floor plans and study those. But here in the Bay Area, we're under construction with projects in Berkeley, just the next exit up off of University, 2 in San Francisco, 1 in Dublin, and 1 in San Jose. So very active here in San Francisco, Bay Area. So that's the introduction to AvalonBay, and I'll let our architect, Mr. Fry, present the project.
Good evening. My name's Clay Fry. I'm with MBH Architects. I'm the principal in charge of the multifamily housing studio. Backing into some of the questions, we have submitted, and is on the screen, the various bonus point chart. We can obviously make this available, and it can be forwarded on to you. It's a menu of options to achieve the 43. Your comment's well placed about the diagrammatic nature of the plans. There's a lot of moving parts to this site. It's an extremely difficult site. It's triangular. It's captured by a Caltrans off-ramp. It's got a railroad track across the street. It creates a myriad of challenges to attempt to design a project that's worthy of the town it sits in, the tenants and the client and the budget. Obviously, you've pointed out some concerns, and we view this process as a collaborative process, even at this level. Feedback and comments are critical to help move the project to where it needs to go. The staff has been extremely helpful to us getting it this far. We actually had long conversations about how detailed of plans we wanted to dive into before we got some of the bigger issues on the table and addressed. And we fully understand that sometimes you have 2 sessions, sometimes you have 2 council sessions. It's an outcome of the give and take between the parties. We've also submitted what we believe is the conformity design guidelines chart. This is working with Maru and Charlie to try and identify what governs, what doesn't govern, what controls the project, and we've been trying to design to those guidelines and work with your staff to hit the goals of the various stakeholders. I thought Maru did a rather nice job walking through the fundamentals of the project. Again, it's a triangular site, which and it's curving, which creates a very interesting edge along the freeway off-ramp. There's an existing low-rise building next to it, and then there's the Shellmound elevation. For those of you who've viewed these sites from the air, you know that the street grid rotates compared to the buildings, or the buildings rotate against the street grid. They jump off of orthogonal. The buildings become diagonal out a couple blocks. There's a detailed chart that gives you square footages, unit counts, et cetera, in your packet. There, we did what we just simply call massing aerials. For those of us that are old enough to have played with the really small all-white Legos, it's basically stacking up the Lego blocks so that you sort of understand the mass in the diagram. It's not trying to chase an aesthetic or an architecture, but it gives you an idea of scale. And we paint them white so they're easily seen. There's one view looking south and one view looking north, and kind of how it sits within there. We do site photographs so that we understand, you know, kind of where it is. The interesting constraints, obviously the railroad track and the off-ramp. Looking back the other way, we produce these because at this stage, before we do renderings, we like to just give a massing, the idea of sort of the scale of the building as you would view it from south on 80, south on Shellmound, north on Shellmound, north on 80. And we do these so that the project team and the stakeholders, which includes you, can say, please render this up or please adjust this angle. We don't assume that any angle is more important than another. So we've presented these to the planning staff and now to you, so you can say, you know, this will tell you a lot more than a flat elevation. Again, it's a massing diagram, and depending where the architecture goes, then we render them so you can fully understand it in 3 dimensions. We take the same massing model and we run the shadow studies. So you have those in your packet that shows the impacts of the height of the building and how the shadows are cast in the various times of the year and times of the day. You can, the fundamental site diagram, the building does curve, the site does curve, and it is triangular. And the buildings become orthogonal to this property line, but not parallel to the street, approximately a block back. And a serrated edge solution, which is rather than just a simple sleek curve. We've worked with landscape rather extensively, and Jeffrey Miller will present his philosophy to create the equivalent of pocket parks or pocket plazas or spill out spaces rather than have the building come directly to the street edge and touch the sidewalk. It's something that goes on in Emeryville. You do have these moments in various places throughout town. You don't have the Bay Street model in a lot of locations where the building simply comes down and hits the sidewalk. So there's a series of pocket parks on the edges. So the comment that it seems to be found, it's created this way on purpose to create found moments. We believe it makes for an interesting building edge as well. Maru went through the circulation plan, so I won't go through that again. There is the possibility of the basement, and that's a function of whether the traffic study pans out that you do or don't need to make the finding with the parking count. You all, I'm sure, are familiar, we're having a hazardous materials report done, which may, what we find in the soil will also have an effect on that and how to mitigate that. We had a very, I thought a very good conversation with bicycle and pedestrian group. And they commented on exactly where the bike parking should be done and how the floor plan should be detailed, so that we get the bicycle parking and the entrance to the retail and the entrance to the housing project and the little plazas and the bike parking in front. And we have all of those notes, and so we're going to assemble those with all of your comments, and then we'll sit as a team and revise the plan to reflect both their comments and your comments to the greatest extent we're able. We didn't jump forward and simply put theirs in, because sometimes you get things that are conflicting. But I thought it was a very productive session that helped us understand the goals of that group. The applicant has also made sure that we have an activated Shellmound edge, which means, as Maru pointed out, there's the possibility of retail, there's the possibility of amenities, and there's units. The garage doesn't come to the major street, which is Shellmound. It's a courtyard-style building. It does have an opening in it so that you can actually walk the perimeter of the site, walk up the flight of stairs across the top of the podium, enter the podium, exit the podium, down the flight of stairs and around. So there's actually a complete pedestrian loop. We do have elevators to facilitate not the people that don't like to deal with stairs. We have an elevator out at this location and an elevator out at this location that can short-circuit the exercise. The crux of the issue is that Emeryville seems to be tired of the architectural style that Mr. Lagaretta set in motion in very expensive materials, and the multifamily products that have ended up around town can't quite afford the same skins as he was able to do. But he has set a philosophy of simple mass and form that I've always admired. The execution of this project was an attempt to utilize materials that a rental product can afford to rent for and afford to build to deliver to society something that people can afford to rent. And we didn't simply use plaster. We have done projects with a variety of plaster finishes, which is, I think, what makes the use of plaster interesting. From a smooth Venetian plaster, which we've used at a World Wildlife Fund project up in Rohnert Park. We utilize the rain screen material, which is a wood-like material in certain locations. In this case, we're using it in the fins. We're using the Venetian plaster in the bay windows to signify entrance in important moments so that people get those visual cues. We have tried to arrange the massing so that the building itself functions a little bit as an artistic canvas of mass and form and shape and window. The base of the building, we're fortunate that we have a concrete parking garage, and so we like to use the concrete rather than build it and then skin it. I'm very fond of a board form concrete with the rough forms because it creates a very nice texture. It's very easy to take care of. It speaks to the industrial character of Emeryville, in my opinion. So we have a very durable retail base. We've spent quite a bit of time with Sudesh at his office working on the retail edges to make sure that we end up with a good bay spacing and a good rhythm so that if we're fortunate enough to get a tenant or if it's inactivated, that it has the appearance of being a retail base. It speaks to the entrance to the residential, which is where we're using the Venetian plaster, the wood fin, and the aluminum bay windows. We did not use every single tool in our toolbox everywhere. It's been pointed out that maybe we didn't use enough of it, but that's part of the lyrical nature of architecture of this style, that you create the notes in locations so that your eye plays through the facade. Part of the study session process is to find, did we use enough notes, not enough notes? Is it the right colors? Is it not the right colors? And so that's just like we want feedback on the parking, we want that same feedback. If it's a, so, and then we have the black and white versions and the color versions. And if you obviously pointed out in the plans that we have a diagrammatic set of overall plans. If the elevations need to modify dramatically through this conversation, what we've done is we have a kit of parts of plans, and I'll get to those in a minute, that we can move behind the skin. This is the sample of materials that we've used, or proposing. And this is the rain screen, aluminum panels, painted steel awnings down at this end, and the railings. Different types of plaster, different finishes of plaster, board form concrete. We do have detailed unit plans. These are the unit plans. So if you looked at a S in the plan, this would be the floor plan for the studio. I believe those are in the packet. This would be the floor plan for the one bedroom. You can see that the studios potentially don't have a deck. The one bedrooms potentially do. AvalonBay doesn't blanket the project with decks. They selectively use decks as architectural features and units that would want decks. For example, against the railroad tracks, you have an acoustic issue. You might not want units with decks along that edge. They have 2-bedroom units. They have 3-bedroom units. The square footage is a gross number. So once you get to a rentable number, it changes slightly. I'm happy to stop and answer questions about architecture. I also have the landscape architect, Jeffrey Miller, here to sort of walk you through the concept of the landscape plan. So I can either stop and we can do architecture, or I can let him go on and we can do the other.
Well, I have a question.
Of course.
Architectural question. This is an extremely noisy location, freeway and railroad.
Yep.
And I was in the new Ambassador low-income housing project, which is right on the freeway, and I was astounded how quiet it was inside. Are you going to be able to achieve that sort of?
I was at Jack London Square last night presenting a project right on the Embarcadero. I have 2 projects that are going to be right against the railroad, and I've designed one other that's directly against it. The California Uniform Building Code requires a minimum indoor noise level that the building has to comply with. So that's a combination of double pane windows, film on windows, wall construction. It can be achieved in wood frame or metal stud or concrete. This project is currently proposed as a wood frame building, and we've done those, and that's how it's done. You need to be sensitive where and how you spot your decks, just because they simply won't be used because it'll be too loud. So you've adopted, as you heard earlier, that building code, and so that building code will, if implemented and built, it will get done that way. So it should be fine if you keep the windows closed. If you open your window, you take your chances.
So there will be an air circulation system, which the Ambassador has.
Yeah, when you are required to acoustically rate windows, which you have to do at the perimeter, you need to deal with the fresh air a different way, because lawsuits have proven that if you don't do that, you will be in trouble. That's a very old way to do the air system. You can't use the window.
Does this site plan show this fire road?
I believe that's kind of a new, what we're working with is the fire department on, they have a rule that you have to have a fire hose, you have to be able to pull a fire hose from either a hydrant or a truck 150 feet. They, upon their discretion, can increase that to 200 feet. This site is over 400 feet deep, so we're talking about how to deal with this edge. I think the proposal, Maru, correct me if I'm wrong, is potentially a grasscrete road that comes around like this and stops. And then if the project, and then it could continue on to the neighboring project, or did you say they wanted it to double back across the face?
Ideally, it would connect, it'll keep going down south and connect to 65th Street.
So we would,
You would not do anything. You would just stop there.
We would just go from there to there.
Well, the
And then, of course, yeah, and then it'll
fire
come out.
trucks need to be able to get out, though.
Yeah, that's why it was confusing to me when you said
Yes,
it.
so it would come back to
They want it
Shellmound.
all the way down here and all the way down there.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
Got it.
So you don't have, so it doesn't need a turnaround.
They want a ring road.
Yeah.
But the windows would be operable, all of the unit
Yes.
windows.
Yeah.
So even though there is mechanical ventilation, they would be operable.
Yes.
Okay, and so you're just anticipating mitigating noise through.
Having done several of these, and actually I used to be a forensic architect, so I used to be on the other side. The windows are operable because you want to make them operable, but you must by code provide fresh air. And if you can't use the window because it's part of the acoustical assembly, you need to find a different way to do the fresh air. And there's a variety of different ways to do that.
I mean,
Every
the noise
project.
level is incredible. We have the window open, but heavy traffic constantly.
Some people, I mean, I spoke to the gentleman that lived in this project, The Bond, which is directly adjacent. I mean, it's right on the railroad tracks down in Embarcadero. They understand it's a train, but they have the window open, they sit on their deck, they watch the train go by. Some people don't do that.
Like at the terraces?
And the reason for including relatively few decks is related to noise as well?
If you blanket a building in decks, in our opinion, it takes on a certain aesthetic, and our client shares that aesthetic, that decks everywhere is not necessary. Some people want them, some people don't. Decks directly, potentially against the building right next to it probably wouldn't be the best place for decks. Decks with views of the bay and the water and the aquatic park. Looking back across the railroad tracks, I think we have a few, but we don't have them everywhere. It's like studios. You put them selectively where they best take advantage of views, and that's how this particular team does them.
And there were none in the courtyard area?
Yes, they would be in the courtyard as well. And the courtyard's not required to be acoustically treated because it's an enclosed environment. The sound can't get there. So those use their windows for fresh air.
I would note that under the new planning regulations, there is an open space requirement, which I believe is 40 square feet of private open space per unit, which can be in the form of decks or patios, and 20 square feet of common open space. If a unit doesn't have private open space, then they can substitute more common open space at a ratio of 2 to 1. So that would be 80 square feet of common open space plus the 20 square feet they have to provide anyway, or 100 square feet per unit. And I believe they have taken that into consideration in designing the common open space for the project.
We understand that any shortfall in common not complying with that sort of backs you into the quantity of decks, and then you selectively place them where they take best advantage of the site. So that's right now where you have more common than is required, and so that's the surplus. But that's, if every single unit needs to have a deck, that's something we need to hear.
Any further questions?
Landscape? Jeffrey?
Hello. Hi, I'm Jeffrey Miller. So I'll take you through the plan. If we're going along Shellmound at the bottom of the plan on your bottom right, there's an entry drive. There'd be a paver system bringing you in. It's going to be a curbless street. The sidewalk bringing you to the entry doors that are on the south side of the building is separated from the drive by a planting area. The area along Expressions College, which is a big concrete wall, we're thinking would be a good location for bamboo. There could be possibly some other planting features that are closer out toward the street, because people coming off the freeway and then coming down will see the corner of that building pretty clearly. You can see along Shellmound, we've got a continuous line of new street trees. That presently the sidewalk is right up against the curb, the back of the curb line. We intend to have a planting zone, a pretty significant planting zone separating the pedestrians from the street. As Clay mentioned, we're kind of working with a kind of series of courtyards along Shellmound that create places for bicycles to park, places to enter the building, kind of breaking down the scale of the street and the kind of pavement that would potentially be there, or a continuous landscape that would be there. There is a continuous loop around the project. We do see that potentially there are quite a few people with dogs that will live in this complex, so we want to give them a way to exercise their dogs. It's kind of a narrow passage along the freeway off-ramp area there. The building's kind of pressing in a little bit, but that's what we have at this point. And we're aware that stormwater will be an issue, and how to deal with that will be part of what we'll be coming back to you with. The darker squares or rectangles are kind of indicative of areas that will be needed for stormwater treatment from the podium level. We expect that the podium design, when we come back, will have infiltration planters, flow-through planters as a part of that scheme, because we'll be taking water from the roof of the building. So let me go to the next one. This is an elevation, the top, the entry drive elevation. You could see the pedestrians on the right. They're coming in a separated walk. The main entry drive that comes into the loading area of the building. We're talking about how to treat that wall of the building, possibly a green screen on that wall to make that feel more like a kind of garden, continuous garden entry. In the Shellmound Street section, one thing I forgot to mention in the plan previously is we're proposing a new crosswalk that would connect the project into the more active parts of the community. So this is showing you the new sidewalk, the separation, the new street trees, and the areas of use adjacent to the building that'll be separated by landscape features. We think paving is an important part of the project, so we'll work actively to design a kind of graphic pavement system around the building. We know there's toxic soils in the area, so we probably won't be using permeable pavers. We will have bike racks and green walls and crosswalks and some of the things that you're seeing there. The plant palette will be varied. We do like the use of possibly ginkgo trees along the street. They do handle urban pollution pretty well, and it's a very kind of active site with the freeway being close by, and we think they'll be of interest. There are kind of north-facing walls, a lot of north-facing parts of the project, kind of northwest, but we see that there will be shady parts of the project, so we'll be using some shade-tolerant plants. We have included in the list plant materials that are appropriate for stormwater management, and as we go forward, this list will get expanded. And I know from previous conversations with this board that everybody's pretty tired of seeing stormwater management plants everywhere. But we do have to manage the stormwater, so we will be using some of those plants on the site. If you want me to go back to the plan, maybe if you had some questions about this.
Would you be maintaining this landscape strip belongs to Caltrans? Is that?
The landscape strip that's beyond the fence is Caltrans property, so I don't think Avalon's ready to take that on. I do know they're interested in kind of helping them prune those trees. There's eucalyptus trees, and there's a lot of things that are dropping off of those trees onto the property, which is a kind of another criteria of what plant material we'll use along that edge. We need to grow the kinds of plants that will be appropriate for that sort of soil condition. But I don't think they're taking on a permanent maintenance of that area between the off-ramp and the fence line.
I don't even know if Caltrans would let you do it.
Yeah. I think they'd like to, but I mean.
Where is the dog park located, or the dog run located exactly?
It's basically all the way around the project. So it's a walk. You come upstairs here onto the podium, come around, there's steps down, and come around and all the way around. So it's a circular system.
So there's not a section of it that's fenced off separately?
No, for your free dog running area, there's not so far.
Okay.
Is there a landscape plan for the courtyard?
We've started to work on a landscape plan for the courtyard. We assume it's going to have units that will be facing the courtyard. We'll have some sort of private spaces, and then there'll be community amenities within the courtyard itself for active use with the whole community. We're kind of discussing with the team what those elements should be, what the amenity level ought to be, and I think by the time you see us next time, we'll have a plan for you to look at.
And the crosswalk, is that just going to be a striped crosswalk, or is there going to be some other traffic control measures there? Because I just see how cars can kind of whip around.
Yeah, the cars are kind of whipping around up here and coming down Shellmound. So at this point, we were showing a crosswalk. If there were other things that needed to be done there, I think they should be considered for sure. You know, whether there's a lighted crosswalk, whether there's some sort of flashing lights or something like that. But we think this is actually an important tie into the community because of the marketplaces a few blocks away. And walking down Shellmound isn't the most pleasant experience. It's a lot of industrial buildings, and so we think getting into the neighborhood more quickly is probably a better idea. So that's what the notion of this crosswalk is.
I think I'd have to take argument with that, because that crosswalk goes right across the Coulter Forge and Steel, and there's no sidewalks on that whole street. We're coming down, you have sidewalks all the way down this way. Expressions, and then you're going to enter the residential area and the public market. So I think this crosswalk, though important, I don't think people are going to be using it that much, because you have to go a whole long city block before you get to Hollis Street and you find anything there. That's going to be part of the comments I'm going to make, is the whole area that this project is in. So we'll hold off on it. But I had a question on, if you go one more slide up.
Forward?
Yeah, the sidewalk shown there on the bottom, how wide is that?
I think it's 8 feet wide.
8 feet, okay.
Yeah.
It's a little hard to read on, it's a little blurry.
Yeah, it was 8.6.
8.6.
Looks like 8.6.
Yeah.
And Miru, I can't remember, you said that if there, sorry, if there was a fire trail that had to, fire access road, was that 20 feet? Is that correct?
Yeah, yeah.
So would that fit in the plan
That
at this
doesn't fit
point?
in here.
I don't believe it would.
That doesn't fit in there.
Yeah.
The building goes right to the property line. on
Yeah,
the
I mean,
south.
you can see it's pretty tight in
You've
here.
got, like,
This is like
5-foot clearance
a
there.
5-foot path here, so it's coming
That
from.
would basically just be all
Access road.
access road.
Well, it would require the kind of transformation of this building edge here to open up space between the property line and the building.
Your courtyard.
Okay.
So there's those enormous eucalyptus that do need trimming, and some of them are in bad shape, but there's some that look like they would kind of scale the building, and they're right on the property line, and I imagine that the construction would potentially do those in, wouldn't they?
Anything that's right on the property line clearly would be endangered by the construction. A lot of the trees are really further out in the middle of this area here. And I agree with you that they really do scale it. I mean, as much as people don't love eucalyptus trees, they're kind of nice big trees right now, so I think they help the building. Yeah.
So all of the area that's being counted as common open space is the courtyards in the front, the sky deck, roof deck garden, and all of that area along the northern side that's including the path and the stormwater planters and
Yes.
the little notches?
Yeah. You know, we've had some conversations about kind of raised bed garden plot areas for residents in this area. It's a kind of south facing. We'll get a lot of nice light. So that will be probably one of the key areas. You know, there are.
Okay, so the sidewalk.
It's a big podium, but you could see from the shade studies that there's some
It's a
challenges.
big, deep podium.
There's challenges in there.
Yeah.
And considering so for the sun deck area there, and considering the noise level in that, 'cause that's not really usable space.
It's where the best view is, but, you know, it's kind of like what Clay said, if you don't mind the train going by.
That ain't the
You know.
train.
That ain't
That's the
train,
cars.
right, Yeah,
The freeway.
Yeah.
I mean, it's on the 7th floor.
yeah.
Okay.
You know, the question is, if it was, say, over on the other side of the building, and you had
Might be more
the
acceptable.
views to the hills, that might be a better location for it. I don't.
If there's further discussion about the fire wanting access all around the building is completely changing. And
I love it.
It's built right against the
Yeah.
property line.
Maybe I should have the architects address that now.
Yeah, thanks, Jeff. Don't go away. Just some background on this fire. We've been talking about this project with the fire department since July. What you have presented is what we've worked out with the fire department, but have not gotten approval. So what we're hoping to do very shortly, because we want to move the project forward, is to close the loop with the fire department regarding the access. But the plan you have today is what we have been talking with them about since July. And we have submitted an alternative design application in September, a formal application, for which we have not received a formal response. So that's where the fire department stands. This discussion about a circular road, I wouldn't, my suggestion is that's not on the table right now. What we're talking about with the fire department is what we presented tonight.
Do you want anything more out of me right now?
Have any further questions?
No.
Okay, thank you.
We'll open the meeting to the public. Is there anyone who wishes to speak on this proposal?
Hi, Rob Arias, 10-year Emeryville resident and Park Avenue District Committee member, and I also write the Evil Eye News blog. I just wanted to run some numbers by you that I'm sure you're probably already aware of. 66% of Emeryville is rentals, and every single major project happening in Emeryville right now is slated for rental. So I don't know what that's going to do the percentage, but it could easily go beyond 75%. I don't know, do the math. Moz, Sherwin-Williams, Parkside, now AvalonBay. So I keep hearing Emeryville wants to be family friendly, but families want to root, you know, they want to invest in their city. They don't want to live in apartments for the rest of their life. So I feel like this is contradictive of that objective. So if it was up to me, I'd ask Nady to sell to somebody who wanted to create condominiums and attract people that want to live in Emeryville, you know, for a longer duration than the 3 years they're probably going to live at Avalon. Probably not going to happen, but we've got to get something out of it. We absolutely have to get something out of this for our community. We don't want any more Subways or Starbucks, and we want to guarantee from them that that's not going to happen. And we want road improvements for that park. It's the worst that I've ever seen. If you're familiar with that road, I mean, you can't ride a bike there. You can barely walk there without twisting your ankle. It's horrible. And they've done business in Berkeley, so they should be able to hopefully grease the wheels there. We absolutely have to get something out of this project. Thank you.
Okay, good, thanks. Any further comment? Close the public meeting and let's discuss it.
Well, I guess just looking at the design, and walking around the area right there, this really is sort of an industrial area meeting a park area, and the design just in general felt a bit out of place. I know our design parameters try to encourage volumetric art, you know, kind of volumetric articulation, but I felt like it was a bit over-articulated volume-wise, and didn't really pay homage or reference the buildings in the area. It seemed like this was really a site that calls more for something kind of a factory or a factory turned inside out approach. And this design is akin to a lot that I see in more kind of suburban, new urbanist cores, like Pleasanton and so forth. So just like to see it adjusted to kind of pay more reference to Emeryville. Is there a way we could pull a site plan up or something instead of a blank screen? There.
Can you do a split screen?
I suppose we probably could do that. Where did that go as a town?
Just in general, site-wise, I felt like I felt like it would benefit if the courtyard was more open towards, is that 65th right there? Or no, this is 67th, 67th. Yeah, I think 7th, right? Yeah. So if the courtyard, you know, if you could, instead of the sun deck being in the back, you know, pulling a deck or a breezeway from the courtyard to the front of the building towards 67th Street, so that people on, you know, obviously we know what 67th Street's like right now, but it's only a matter of time till that will change too. You've got Prize Fighter up the street, you've got, you know, a lot of opportunities, and so opening up to 67th Street through that front facade, articulating the main entry better. Right now it's in plane with everything else, and maybe popping that out or pulling that in. And then a lot of what I saw was just, I mean, obviously without being able to see where balconies are intended to go, it just, you know, I felt like the double-loaded corridor scheme without seeing where balconies are just felt very insular. And so I'd like to see the balconies. I'd like to see where they're intended. I'd like to see balconies deep enough that they're, and with doors located on them in a way that they're useful, especially in the courtyard area. I think they're less important, obviously, along the freeway. And they could be nice on the east side as well, but I think the courtyard's key, and having some kind of way to take that double-loaded corridor and also expose that to the courtyard at some locations, whether that's popping through and becoming an exit balcony at some places, or at least, you know, there's corners where it's shown, but it almost meets the courtyard but never does, and so opening that up can bring in a lot of natural light. I'd like to see that coordinated with the elevator lobbies in a way that the lobbies could even have sort of a lounge area that with windows that face the courtyard where, at certain key spots along the corridor, so it really sort of connects those to the courtyard who don't even have houses or units facing the courtyard. And then let's see here. I mean, let's see what some of my other ones. Yeah, the pedestrian crossing across Shellmound, I feel like actually having the blinking lights that you can press the button to get across would be really valuable, because just trying to get across there was like a death trap. And I mean, I agree, you know, some people are going to want to walk along Shellmound, but there's also, I think, going to be a lot more happening just over on Hollis near 67th as well, so being able to connect over there. As far as the commercial space goes, I mean, I frankly, I might be the one who, you know, others might disagree with me, but I'd be happy to get rid of it for this project, and actually, I don't feel like it's going to be much use. I think you're going to end up with a really compromised space, you know, use, and I would love to see more ground level units with actual, I mean, that corner right there, I mean, you do have the street and cars zipping around, but you also have aquatic park right down the street, and so ground level units with some porches or, you know, something like that could really make that corner nice. I think it's going to really, you know, a lot's going to make or break this project based on the landscaping, the courtyard in particular, and really like to see the courtyard utilized in a way that'll engage people, barbecues, you know, kids play area, maybe even a hot tub and a gazebo or something like that that really gets people out there. I think, I mean, immediately I was wondering, when I first saw the site, I was wondering how fire was going to access the rear of the building, and so I just have a hard time imagining you're not going to need a EVA along the north and west sides of the property. And I've used Grasscrete on EVAs with meandering paths through it, and it's great. Basically can feel like a bike path, and I think that, you know, and then even looking at, if that you've got that along that side, treating it like an amenity instead of something that's been forced, is there a way to drop the units down so that there's a room and a balcony or a porch facing that EVA, which would then really be more of like a landscaped kind of long kind of garden pathway. Yeah, I think those were my main comments. Yeah.
So I'll touch on some things that I don't think you've talked about, so as to minimize being repetitive. With regard to the mix of uses, I felt that given the location of the project, that the mix of the uses with the residential and proposed recreational for the tenants and potentially some incubator spaces for the Expression College next door, I felt that that would be adequate in terms of it complying with a mixed-use category. As far as the unit mix and the sizes, I felt that the sizes of the units I felt were adequate. I did notice that the studios and the one-bedrooms were roughly the same size, so I'm not really sure why there's, why there aren't more one-bedrooms versus studios, because they're almost roughly the same size. I felt that the 2- and 3-bedroom units, not knowing much about how they're laid out, I would like to have more information on that. But in terms of the square footage size, I thought that they were fairly generous the way that they're shown now, and I think that it also leaves the applicant the opportunity to maybe take advantage of bonus points by providing some family-friendly housing for those larger units because of the size. It's an opportunity to do that and perhaps explore the option of having not just rentals but some ownership opportunities. And I like what you described in terms of maybe bringing some of the units down to the street where there's porches and just ways to engage. So for the open space, I was really curious because there were quite a few sheets included on this shadow study. And I really looked at that closely, and it seemed to me that the courtyard, to a large degree, is very shady. I'm not sure if everyone else noticed that, and that's not something I typically look for. I'm not a landscape architect, I usually don't look at that, but that one caught my attention, and it seemed to me that I was looking to, well, maybe opening the courtyard to the west, actually, and you'd mentioned to the east, which I like that idea as well. But in general, just allowing a way to allow more light into that courtyard, because that's something that I'm not seeing based upon the shadow study. And then that kind of brings me to just the massing of the project in general. It seemed very, very blocky and just kind of monolithic. I mean, if there were a way to open up the courtyard and have separate buildings, have ways to see through the project at the different sides of the project. Right now, it seems like it's very, enclosed like this. So, and I think that makes it probably appear to be less a part of the community, which what I'm hearing, at least in the public comment, is that's more of what we want to see. Let's see, was there anything else? As far as the materials, I think that that's been made quite clear. I did notice that the materials that were more of the durable type, the concrete, the metal, I thought that was a positive thing, but obviously there's an issue with the sort of the stucco and the multicolor that needs to be looked at again. And in terms of the bonus points, my preference would be to see, you achieve those through either providing family-friendly housing, through ownership, and public improvements. I think that's all I have.
Well, the things that I like about the project, I do like the cladding, the parking at the bottom, and trying to activate Shellmound Street. I think that the unit mix is decent as far as having larger 3-bedroom and 2-bedroom units. I thought that was good. Whoops, we lost our picture here. But I would love to see it with a smaller footprint, more open, because I don't think that the open spaces are really working. The interior courtyard is shaded almost all the time. The interior facades of some of those units are going to be shaded most of the time. I don't see that aside from walking around the building, I don't see that space on the northern side is going to be very usable. It's going to be shaded. It's going to be next to a freeway off-ramp. If it's screened from the freeway off-ramp, it's going to be screened by a fence or something that closes you in even more. I don't see that putting any porches or anything on that side is going to work very well, just because the environment there is not going to be attractive to be outside in. So something that would make it, I wouldn't mind seeing it more slender, taller, and just having more light and air around it, because I do get the feeling that this is a great, big, hulking, dark thing, and it's at a gateway to our community. It's a place where a lot of people enter Emeryville. It's the edge of Emeryville. It's the first thing that a lot of people are going to be seeing coming from the northern side, and having something that looks more attractive and is a little bit more distinctive would be really nice. As I said, I think those eucalyptus trees on the property line, some of them are shabby, but some of them are kind of magnificent. They're huge, and if those have to be lost, that'll be a shame. I think that a real important connection, rather than connecting to the east up 67th Street, is improving the connection towards Aquatic Park, especially if the open space is going to be courtyards, podiums, and things like that, to be able to facilitate people getting up to Aquatic Park, which is a wonderful place and a wonderful open space, would be really nice. The park, it seems like the kind of incubator uses that have been talked about that relate to the businesses like Expressions and some of the other tech businesses along that corridor would be workable, but I don't see any kind of retail uses or that kind of mix of uses happening. What else do I have? I would echo the comments about the materials, that some of the more durable metal and concrete materials seem like they're appropriate, especially in the context of this being next to the industrial area, but the colored stucco blocks and the repetitive nature of those things just is not working so well for this site. And that's my comments for the moment.
Well, I agree with most of the comments we've heard so far. I am concerned of the fact we haven't seen the floor plan layout, so we really don't know what's going on there. As far as making it a condominium, that really hasn't worked as far as attracting families. Pacific Park Plaza and Watergate have less than 50% owner occupants. We have a number of other buildings that have condominium maps on them that could be converted at any time. But there doesn't seem to be a market for it, and it would be nice to have more ownership, but there aren't people that want to own them and live in them. So to me, that doesn't work. I agree about the massing is a little too tight. I do like the staggered facade on the freeway off-ramp. I think that breaks up the mass very nicely, but something's going to have to be done to open that courtyard. And I think it would be preferable if it could open to the south. But as it is now, there's just one little passage at one floor level that opens out, and that doesn't mean anything.
Okay, all right, so if you allow me to get on my soapbox for 30 seconds, I would be amiss if I didn't say something, which is that ultimately I think this is not a good site for housing. If you look at the data on health impacts this close to a freeway, it's really quite alarming. So, in my heart of hearts, believe that we should not be exposing people to such great risk. That said, the general plan identifies this use as being allowed in this location, so I will accept that. And I will get off my soapbox, but I do want to stay on the topic of uses. As far as the commercial space, that use, I do think it has marginal viability. I appreciate that was acknowledged at the community meeting. Acknowledging it, however, is not something we get to do. So we have to make a finding that it's not feasible, and in order to do that, we legally need data in order to do that. So, I'm going to make a confession. I love data. So anyway, I would just ask that you back that up somehow. If I don't get to ask this very often, but if you were to show us your pro forma and a truly independent analysis of it, and it said that was not feasible to do that, I think we could accept that, or some other analysis. I mean, from my perspective, it's mostly infeasible from an economic standpoint. So I don't see anything about the site that makes it inadequate for commercial, other than the market doesn't accept that. So anyway, so moving on, let's see, fire access. So I have a question for the staff. So the fire department, if the fire department requires, says they need, a road or whatever access to wherever on the site, is that it? I mean, what are we required to do? What if we don't like the way that translates into building design?
When I mentioned the 20-foot fire road along the perimeter, that was simply a suggestion. They're not requiring the applicant to do that. But as they are showing, I mean, like Jeff mentioned, as proposed, the building cannot be built with the fire's approval. They need to provide some, like as well as Commissioner Gunkel was mentioning, this is not fire code compliant at the moment. And the applicant is working with the fire department to come with a solution. And that 20-foot perimeter road was simply a suggestion that was thrown out by George Warren at the DCC meeting.
Okay.
Because that would have a lot of implications on the building size.
So if I understand correctly, we're just trying to get to fire code compliant at this point.
They have to do the fire code compliance.
Yeah. Okay. So that said, I would really like to see, and I think I'll move on to public open space next because these sort of overlap a little bit. But that said, I would really like to see solutions that got you to compliance with the fire code that gave us a little bit of extra value, as well. So if those spaces could be genuinely used for other things, or maybe there are some innovative ways to provide fire access where you don't need to provide these wide corridors. Maybe we can do other things, hydrants in other locations or whatever. But if we're going to have to provide corridors for fire access, I would really like to see them be designed in a quality way that they were usable for other purposes. So that brings me to public open space. I agree wholeheartedly with everything Commissioner Donaldson said. I don't think the public open space on the site is very well designed or located, or I forget what I was going to say, but I really would like to see it consolidated more. I mean, I don't mean to pick on you or call you out, but it really, I mean, let's call a spade a spade. It really appears, looking at this site plan, like the building was designed and the areas that were left over were called the public open space. So I really would like to see that designed in a thoughtful way that really made it more usable. So if it could be consolidated and put on Shellmound as a public plaza, or you know, even located on the what is that, the south side of the site, might be an option. The area adjacent to the freeway is just really not a good area for public open space. It is, I think, as Commissioner Donaldson pointed out, it's noisy, it's in shade. There's just a lot of reasons to not have it there. It's just not going to be usable. And so moving on to private open space, I would like to see more balconies. I get that every unit doesn't need a balcony, but by my calculation, I counted just what you happen to be showing on the elevations right now, and I think I counted about 20 balconies, which is less than 10% of the units. I think probably more than 10% of the residents want balconies. And I really understand that it's a challenge along the freeway side, because those are definitely going to be less desirable and less utilized balconies if they're utilized at all. But you do have opportunities for them on the Shellmound Street side and on that remaining side, where they probably would be a lot more utilized. So I don't think the building needs to be peppered with them. I get what you're trying to add interest, but I think the way they are right now, there aren't really even enough of them to add interest. So I would really like to see them accomplish that goal. And then I had one other thing. Oh, it was just about architecture. I really would like to see more, just better quality of the exterior materials. Yeah, I think that's a big part of, I think, what is lacking from this design. I appreciate the analogy to Legorata, but if Legorata had only ever designed Tustin Marketplace and Pershing Square, we probably wouldn't know his name. So I think he's a good architect for other reasons, and so I would really like to see some higher quality exterior materials. And then just to finish, as far as the public benefits that we are being asked to look at in order to approve the bonuses, Maru was kind enough to pass out the list to us, and I just marked the ones that I think that I would like to see. Public open space being one. If there was any way for you to accommodate more than you're required to, I think that would be great. Sustainable design and alternative energy, I think, would also be great. It sounds like the transportation demand management type things might be, you might have to do for your parking reduction. So I don't think we would double count those, but those are all bike stations, electric vehicle charging stations, I think are all things that would be great to see. And then universal design was the other one that I marked. That concludes my comments.
So thank you, Commissioner Moss, for getting on your soapbox, because that's just what I was going to say. I remember when we were making the general plan, this north end was a very difficult site for everyone to get consensus on as to what needed to be there, and we all sort of hoped and prayed for an iconic hotel that was above 100 feet, if I remember correctly, where people would be, would be able to have a closed air system and they would not be living there. That being said, and as it's a democratic process, here we are. And so, although I am very interested in having family-friendly housing in this city, I don't necessarily know that this is the space for it. I do believe that people will want to eventually possibly purchase this, and so I'm not sure if the market is there yet. And at the same time, I think I like the fact that there are 2 and 3 bedrooms, and I think that will go a long way. I'm not sure if we couldn't even have the mix is all right. I agree strongly with Commissioner Gunkel in that there's something about this space that needs to speak to the industrial nature and the sort of unique nature of where it is. And I like the idea of industrial turned inside out. So using higher quality materials, using steel, concrete, glass, possibly going up higher. I agree also with Commissioner Donaldson about where we need, and Tan, and probably all the commissioners, more light and air in this space, more permeability to make it more of attractive to the neighborhood and not to be so insular. The courtyard space is going to be dreary at best. It'll be in darkness at almost all times. And I also agree that the open space is basically an afterthought. I think that the western edge of the property needs to be basically forgotten about. I mean, it could be a fire road, and that's wonderful, and a bike path, but I do not think that that is a public amenity except as a get-through. It's not a space where anyone's going to want to hang out or spend time, and the same thing with the sun deck up on the west side. Maybe that could be moved. There will be good light coming from the south side, so maybe that opening needs to get bigger. And although it will bring in noise coming from the railroad tracks, I think that maybe with different spacing of things and possibly not all one giant building, the sound could be mitigated and have more open spaces in that. So maybe it's a grouping of buildings as opposed to one giant building. Let's see. Yeah, I think it just looks very new urban, but really it's just kind of really tall suburban look to it. And the fenestration's very regular and quite boring. It kind of looks like a motel. I hate to say it. So I would like to see something much better, of much better quality.
I guess I'm up. Well, and here I thought we were saving the worst for last, and you guys are all kind of agreeing with me. Having my husband been on the General Plan Steering Committee, I think since the beginning or very near the beginning, I know how hard the city worked to get a use of this property for something so much better than what we're showing here. I really have to question, like everyone else did, thank God, is an apartment complex really right for this? Because 67th Street and 66th Street in our new general plan is slated to be light industrial. I don't see that ever turning around to be housing or shopping. It's always going to be some kind of industrial. I don't think the storage place is going away anytime soon. I just would much rather see a mixed use on this site being offices and hotels. I don't know why Emeryville has a problem mixing uses within a building and every other city can do it. I'd like to see a 20-story building there, something that has a hotel on the bottom 10 and offices on the top, or maybe put apartments or condos on the top. I am very concerned, as our resident was, about our housing mix. Living in a condo and owning a place, this is why I'm on the Planning Commission, is I am a vested person in this community. And when people say that they're not selling, I talked to Bridgewater 2 weeks ago. They can't release those places fast enough. They have a 200-person waiting list to try to get, and the reason that they can't release them is they have to get the renters out. Every unit I see that goes for sale on the Greenway, which I've seen 3 in the past month, are gone before the end of the month. So I think that, yeah, we're not San Francisco, but I think people want to live here. And I think if we create the city that people want to live in, that we will get more tenants. But we're becoming a bedroom community to San Francisco, and that's really concerning me. And the other concern I have is, where is our job housing mix going? I live in this area. Right now, we have over 1,660 dwelling units in the North Bayfront. This project, if approved, would add nearly 2,000. We're looking at 1,920 housing units within North Bayfront. And it's like, we're losing our jobs housing mix. We are a city. We're not a Pleasanton. We're not Tracy. And I just don't feel that, I know what we're trying to do here is we're trying to build a stick project that doesn't have to go underground to build the supports. I know you don't want to go over 8 stories or 7 stories above the cement so you can stay in the stick, but You know, when San Francisco is selling properties in the tens of millions of dollars and they're tearing things down and they're building skyscrapers, I have here with me San Francisco Magazine, and they're talking about 150 development projects in San Francisco. We're too close, you know, to miss out on this. They have another 145 in the pipeline. I don't understand why we can't get some of this spillover, and I think it's because we're not looking for it. So maybe AvalonBay, if they want to build stick buildings, isn't the right developer for this. But I know, if I understand, you guys do have some high-rises. Put a high-rise here, you know. Let's find out what's in the soil. Let's find out what the real cost would be. I don't know what you're paying for the property, but some places in San Francisco, they're paying $98 million for just the property. You know, so I think we're selling ourselves short, and it's time we stop. That, you know, it's now time that, you know, the Sherwin-Williams site is very unique and very different. That should be low density, and we should be careful what we put there. This is a gateway. This is the entrance to our city. So, I mean, that being said, I could go on about what I like and what I don't like about the project. I agree with everything the council has said. I just don't think, I think your parking overflow, if you don't do the city recommended amount, I don't think your parking overflow is going to be a problem because the curbs on the east side of the street are red. There's not a lot of parking on the other side. But I don't have a problem with lower parking, but take some of your bike parking and put in bike lockers. I have a bike locker. I bike every day, and having a locker is really, really important to me. And you're overparked on bikes, I think. I agree with everything everyone else has said, and you know, by what I had sent in writing, that I really don't appreciate the architectural design. I think it could be cleaner, it could be sleeker. I think Brad's comments, let's put a big, you know, go look at the Emeryville building with those big glass windows that a Cliff Bar gets to enjoy every day. Do something like that if that's where you want to go with this. I think if this comes back in its form as it is, I can give you more comments on the project, but I really, I had some comments to make, but really I think I can't support an apartment complex of this style there at all.
I would just like to add on to that set of comments is I can see that it's a very difficult site for the type of project that you're proposing there, but it's also a really unique site. It's got views to the north that are never going to go away. It's got views to the Bay, the Golden Gate, San Francisco. It's right now taller than everything to the south of it pretty much, and it's got views in that direction. It's got views of the Berkeley Hills and everything else, and this project does not take advantage of any of that. And whether it was offices, condominium, hotel, or whatever, you have a real opportunity here to make something that looks great and that is really appreciated by the people that reside or work in it, because it really is a special spot. It's kind of a weird shape, but if you're not trying to cram a great big thing on the ground plane, you can do wonderful things on it.
Well, I think the fact that it's kind of a square circle is the problem. And if it was a cross instead, so that all the units looked outward, you could accomplish a lot of that.
I mean, if it is housing, I actually like the courtyard approach for multiple reasons. I think controlling the sound and sort of creating a safe space is key. Opening up correctly, or as necessary, is important. And then looking at that, and when Commissioner Tan was talking, I was thinking, well, if the north side gets taller and the south side gets shorter, to really start to kind of bring light into that courtyard, and piercing it more, making it more open in the directions to the, definitely to the south and maybe to the east. I think the train noise is less offensive than the constant hum of the freeway in my mind. But views are great, and I think this has the opportunity to capture a lot of great views, but at the same time create a nice community with some safe kind of open space that is engaged by all the units, as many of the units as possible, and by the common areas. Something I think would be valuable.
Just wanted to make an additional comment in terms of, I didn't go over the bonus categories that I was interested in, and I did sort of go into the architecture and things that I liked and things that I didn't. And now that I heard Stephen's comments, I would that's really where my heart is that this project is not appropriate for the space. So I think and I also agree that a, why can't we have a better mix of possibly some residential with more, say, office or hotel or all the above, boutique hotel, whatever it is. So as it stands, I don't think fiddling around with things is going to cut it for me. The bonus categories that I would be interested in for a better project would be sustainable design, would be renewable energy, would be using recycled water system. And I think water, as we are in now a quite serious drought, is going to continue to be an issue, and we're going to need to address that.
Yeah, Commissioner Coomerly, you actually bring up, I think, a really valid point, which is that I hadn't really thought about it this way until now, but we're being sort of asked to evaluate whether this commercial space is feasible, and I think the consensus here was that it's not. But that doesn't mean there's a variety of other uses that could be accommodated into the project, which might be feasible in this location, which the general plan allows, and which would make it the mixed-use project that's envisioned by the general plan. So that is a really good point. I did also want to add my 2 cents to the discussion of ownership versus rental housing. That's a discussion that makes me very uneasy. It is, I appreciate the difficulty of that discussion, and I appreciate the implications of that discussion, but I think it's largely a policy discussion that is really something for the city council to decide and to direct and to incorporate into the planning regulations for us to implement. We're largely here to make decisions on land use and decisions on design, and it's not really a land use question. I mean, the land use is the same whether it's ownership or rental. It's multifamily residential is the general plan land use. So it's something that makes me very uneasy when we're asked to discriminate between ownership and rental units. Also, I just want to acknowledge that, especially in the current economic climate, if we think that most people, have the ability to own a unit, I think we're fooling ourselves. And I think it really is important to say that most families want to rent or want to own. Well, it might be true that they want to own. There are also realities about what is feasible for people, and I think we do need to incorporate a mix of ownership and rental housing in the appropriate mix. And like I said, I feel that's a policy question for the council to decide.
Charlie, do we need any?
Well, I think you've certainly commented on all of the points that we asked about. So I think we have direction. Anything further, Miru? No? I think we're good.